I was staring at the vintage diamond ring resting right in the palm of my hand.
It was the exact same ring my husband had publicly wept over losing 3 months ago.
My hands were shaking so violently that the heavy platinum band just slipped right through my fingers. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, echoing through the empty house like a gunshot.
But honestly, the ring wasn't even the most terrifying thing I found hidden inside his locked office.
It was the leather-bound diary sitting right underneath it.
For 5 years, I had loved a man who simply did not exist.
I built a life, a home, and a whole future with a phantom.
It was all a carefully constructed illusion. My husband Julian came from a family with an overwhelming amount of pride and a severely underwhelming bank account.
They were old money, but the money dried up 2 generations ago.
I, on the other hand, grew up in a loud, chaotic, working-class home. I built my own digital marketing agency from the ground up in my 20s. I was entirely self-made. He was charming, sophisticated, and had this quiet confidence I totally mistook for stability. When he proposed, he did it with the famous sterling family heirloom. His mother, Eleanor, made a terrible scene when he gave it to me. She pulled me aside at our engagement party and let me know exactly where I stood. Her grip was literally bruising my arm. She whispered that I was merely a temporary custodian of a legacy I could never truly understand. She told me the ring was worth more than my entire company. A blatant lie, of course, but it set the tone for our whole marriage. I was always the outsider. The nightmare truly began on a rainy Tuesday in October. I'd hosted a small gathering at our home for my agency's top executives. We were celebrating a major corporate merger we just facilitated. It was a lively, wonderful evening filled with my colleagues, people I trusted with my life. I'd taken the vintage ring off to wash my hands before preparing a charcuterie board. I left it in a small porcelain dish on the kitchen windowsill. I'd done this 100 times before. But the next morning, the ring was gone. I tore the house apart. I emptied every trash can, pulled up the plumbing in the sinks, and crawled on my hands and knees across every inch of the floors. I was in an absolute panic, terrified of what Julian would say. Julian's reaction was immediate and entirely theatrical. He didn't just panic, he grieved. He collapsed onto the kitchen island, burying his face in his hands. He sobbed about how he'd failed his ancestors and how a piece of his family's soul had been stolen. Then came the accusation. He didn't say it outright at first, but he planted the seed. He pointed out that the only people in the house the night before were my colleagues. He suggested with calculated sorrow that someone from my world must have slipped it into their pocket. I defended my team fiercely. These were people I'd built my business with, people I trusted completely. But the seed of doubt was sown. I couldn't prove they didn't take it, and the ring was simply gone. When Eleanor found out, she was merciless. She showed up at our house unannounced and bypassed me entirely. She held Julian as if he were a wounded child. It was a performance designed to make me feel as small as possible. Then she turned to me, her eyes cold and utterly devoid of empathy. She announced that I was careless, reckless, and entirely responsible for the theft. She demanded that I use my personal savings to reimburse the family trust. She wanted the appraised value of the ring, which was an astronomical amount. Julian played the role of the peacemaker while his mother was there. But later that night, he quietly suggested that she was right, say in a natural American voice, mimicking his manipulation. He said that since it was lost on my watch during a party for my business, it was my fault. He convinced me
I bore the moral and financial responsibility. The guilt consumed me.
I felt sick to my stomach every time I looked at him. We filed a police report, and Julian handled the massive insurance claim. Because the ring was a scheduled asset, the payout was expected to be well into the six figures. As the insurance investigation dragged on, Julian's behavior started to shift. He became incredibly protective of his home office. He even installed a heavy-duty deadbolt on the door. He started carrying the only key on a lanyard around his neck. He never took it off, not even for a second. It was a constant reminder that I was locked out. If I even walked past the door while he was working, he'd snap at me. He claimed the sound of my footsteps disrupted his concentration. He was treating me like an intruder in my own home. More concerning was the sudden financial distance between us. Julian claimed his consulting business was going through a dry spell, so I willingly took over all of our household expenses. But despite having no income, he was constantly receiving packages. He bought custom suits, golf clubs, and high-end watches. He claimed his mother was buying them to lift his spirits. My intuition started screaming at me that something was profoundly wrong. Then you realize the truth. The grief he displayed in public was just an act. It didn't match the smug demeanor he wore when he thought I wasn't looking. The breaking point arrived when Julian announced a weekend trip. He said he was going to a remote cabin with his old fraternity brothers. He claimed he needed to decompress from all the stress. He hugged me goodbye, playing the part of the weary husband. He kissed my forehead and drove off, leaving me alone in the quiet house. 2 hours later, my accountant called me in a panic. She needed tax documents from 3 years ago by the end of the day. I knew exactly where they were, inside Julian's locked office. I called him repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. Driven by professional urgency and a creeping suspicion, I made a choice. I picked up the phone and called a professional locksmith. I told the locksmith I'd locked myself out of my own home office. He showed up fast, no questions asked. He got right to work on that heavy deadbolt Julian had installed. Within 20 minutes, the lock finally clicked open. I paid the guy in cash and tipped him heavy for his trouble. I waited until he was gone before I even touched the handle. I stepped into my husband's sanctuary for the first time in months. The room was immaculately clean. It felt completely sterile, like a museum exhibit instead of a workspace. I went straight to the filing cabinet in the corner. I dug out the tax documents my accountant needed right away. I set them on the desk, fully intending to just grab them and walk out. I was about to leave. I actually felt a pang of guilt for invading his privacy. But as I turned around, I bumped hard into the edge of his heavy mahogany desk. The impact knocked something loose. A hidden panel right inside the knee space popped open just a crack. I froze, and my breath completely caught in my throat. I knelt down on the floor and pulled the panel all the way open. Tucked inside that dark little space was a fireproof combination safe. I just stared at it, my heart pounding. I didn't know the combination, but I knew Julian. He was arrogant, but he wasn't exactly creative. I tried his birthday, then his mother's birthday. The safe just sat there, completely locked. I sat back, trying to think of what date actually mattered to him. Then I got this sinking, nauseating feeling in my gut. I reached out and typed in the exact date the ring went missing. The keypad beeped. A cheerful little green light lit up, and the heavy metal door swung open. I couldn't even breathe. I was terrified of what I was about to find. There it was, sitting right on top of a stack of crisp, banded $100 bills. the vintage diamond and sapphire ring. It was sparkling under the dim light of the office. Entirely unharmed and completely unstolen. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. The shock was so absolute that it bypassed my emotions entirely. It triggered this cold, hyper-focused state of survival. Everything suddenly became crystal clear. I reached into the safe and picked up the ring. But that wasn't the most terrifying thing in there. Underneath the cash, there was a thick, black, leather-bound notebook. I pulled it out, my hands steady now, and opened it. What I read inside that diary will haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't a journal of feelings or random thoughts. It was a meticulously detailed ledger of betrayal. It was a playbook. Julian had been documenting his resentment toward me for years. He hated that I made more money than him. He hated that he had to ask me for things. He felt emasculated by my success. But instead of just leaving, he decided to dismantle me. The entries detailed the exact timeline of his plan. He faked the theft during my company party to isolate me. He wrote about how easy it was to manipulate his mother. He knew blaming me would break my spirit. But the most terrifying entries were about the finances. Julian had been secretly siphoning money from our joint accounts. He moved it into an offshore account under a dummy corporation. He even documented forging my signature on 2 massive loans. Then, I found the final phase of his plan. The $400,000 insurance claim would clear in 2 weeks. He wrote, "Once the funds hit, transfer the balance. Serve Clara with divorce papers and leave her with the debt." He was going to destroy my business and steal his own heirloom. He planned to pocket $500,000 in insurance fraud and leave me drowning in manufactured debt. I sat in his leather chair for 3 hours. I read every single page. When I was done, I took my phone out and photographed everything. I photographed the ring, the cash, and every page of that diary. I captured his exact handwriting and his step-by-step confession. I had him dead to rights on wire fraud and identity theft. I put the diary back exactly where I found it, stacked the cash, set the ring right on top, and locked the safe. I pushed the hidden panel shut and walked out like nothing happened. I locked the deadbolt behind me. That heavy click didn't sound like him keeping me out anymore. It sounded like me sealing his fate. When Julian got back from his little trip, I was waiting in the kitchen. Just sipping my coffee, playing the stressed-out wife. He kissed my forehead and asked if I had a relaxing weekend. I say this warm, perfect smile, looked him dead in the eyes, and told him my weekend was incredibly enlightening. He didn't suspect a thing. The second he left for a networking lunch the next morning, I went to war. I didn't call a therapist, and I sure didn't call my mom. I went straight to Vivian, the most ruthless corporate litigator in the city. I walked into her boardroom and just slid my phone across the glass table. I let her swipe through the photos of the safe, the cash, and that diary. I needed someone who wouldn't give me pity. Vivian didn't show an ounce of pity, which was exactly what I needed. She just nodded, pulled out a legal pad, and went straight to work. We brought in a forensic accountant the very next day. Using the account numbers Julian was dumb enough to write down, our guy tracked every single stolen dollar. He found the forged loans and the dummy corporation. We had him dead to rights. Vivian laid out the game plan. If I confronted him now, he'd panic and move the cash. We had to let him think he was winning. We had to wait for that insurance payout to clear. For 12 agonizing days, I lived with a monster. I cooked his dinners and listened to him whine about the missing ring. Every time he turned his back, I felt sick, but I played the perfect wife. Thursday morning rolls around and Julian struts into the kitchen looking like he just won the lottery. He tells me the insurance company finally approved the claim. 400 grand is hitting our joint account tomorrow afternoon. He pulls me into this big, dramatic hug, whispering about how we can finally heal. I hug him back, but my blood is absolute ice. The reality of what I'm about to do just settles into my bones. The second the front door clicks shut, the devoted wife act is over. I'm standing alone in that pristine kitchen, just staring at the door. I grab my phone to make the call. I call Vivian and tell her the wire is pending for tomorrow. The trap we spent 2 weeks building is finally set. There's no turning back now. It's time to lock down his entire life. Because we had hard proof of his fraud, Vivian moves with terrifying speed. She gets a judge to sign an emergency injunction right then and there. In the eyes of the law, Julian is now an active flight risk. Say Friday night rolls around, and Julian invites his mother over for a little victory dinner. I spend the afternoon playing hostess, setting the formal dining room table. I even use the fine antique china Eleanor always claimed I didn't appreciate. So Eleanor shows up right on time wearing that smug, triumphant look on her face. She walks into my house like she owns the place, chin up in the air. She's totally ready to gloat about how careless I am. All through dinner, Eleanor just holds court at the table. She goes on and on about the incredible resilience of the Sterling family. I just sit there, sipping my wine, letting them enjoy their little delusion. She looks right at me, her eyes full of pure condescension. She actually tells me she hopes I learned a valuable lesson about responsibility. I just nod and take it. Let her dig the hole a little deeper. Julian is sitting at the head of the table, holding his wine glass like he's royalty. He looks exactly like a king who just conquered a foolish enemy. He has absolutely no idea his entire kingdom has already been seized. As we finished the main course, Julian cleared his throat. He looked at me with deep, totally fake sympathy. He said the trauma of the last few months made him realize we were fundamentally incompatible. He delivered the speech perfectly, claiming he needed space. He was dumping the guilty wife, taking the money, and walking away clean. Eleanor nodded solemnly from across the table. She was pretending to be sad, but I could see a triumphant smile twitching. She thought her golden boy had finally won. I didn't cry, and I definitely didn't beg. I just picked up my napkin, dabbed my mouth, and took a slow sip of my wine. I let the silence stretch out for a second. I was savoring the absolute control I had over the room. I looked right at him and said in a perfectly calm voice that I completely agreed. I told him staying together would be impossible, especially with his upcoming schedule. Julian frowned, his arrogant mask slipping. He asked what schedule I was talking about. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I reached down under my chair. I picked up a thick manila folder I'd hidden there earlier. I brought it up and tossed it right onto the center of the dining table. It landed next to the gravy boat with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room, shattering their smug little celebration. They both just stared at the envelope. They had no idea it held the absolute destruction of their world. I looked him dead in the eyes and answered his question. I told him I was referring to his upcoming deposition and his criminal fraud trial. I also mentioned the inevitable federal prison sentence that comes with stealing $400,000. The silence in that room was absolute. Eleanor let out this short, confused gasp, clutching her pearls.
Her triumphant smirk vanished instantly. It was replaced by pure bewilderment and rising panic. Say, Julian's reaction was even better. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking sick. He stared at the folder like it was a live bomb. The confident king suddenly realized he was standing on a trapdoor. I didn't raise my voice or show any anger. I spoke with the clinical precision of a CEO firing a toxic employee. I told him that at exactly 3 o'clock, my lawyer executed a court-ordered asset freeze. I watched the realization hit him. Julian started to stammer. He tried to force this dry, panicked laugh. He looked at his mother, then at me, and actually called me insane. He said I was just making things up because my feelings were hurt. That was when I finally opened the folder. I pulled out the first 8x10 glossy photograph. With one smooth motion, I slid it right across the polished wood table. It stopped directly in front of Eleanor. It was the photo of the vintage diamond ring sitting right on top of the cash inside Julian's safe. Eleanor just stared at it. Her hands started to tremble. She looked up at her son, and you could see this horrified realization wash over her. Then I slid the copies of his diary pages across the table. I looked right at him and read his own words back to him. I read the entry where he laughed about manipulating his own mother. I read the part where he detailed exactly how he was going to drain my business and leave me with nothing. Julian stood up so fast his chair crashed to the floor. He just started screaming. That calm, sophisticated gentleman completely vanished. He was replaced by this cornered, desperate animal, yelling that I had no right to break into his office. I stood up, resting my hands on the table. I leaned forward just enough to make him step back. I didn't even raise my voice. I just told him his life was ruined the moment he decided I was a resource to be mined instead of a human being to be loved. I turned to Eleanor. She was weeping, clutching the photograph of the ring to her chest. She was just rocking back and forth. Her golden boy, her perfect legacy, was a common thief and a fraud. I looked at her and quietly suggested she might want to hire a very good defense attorney for her son, assuming they had any money left to pay for one. There was nothing left to say. The illusion was completely shattered. I walked out of the dining room. I didn't look back. I went straight to the front door and opened it. Vivian had timed it perfectly. 2 police officers and an insurance fraud investigator were walking right up the driveway. I stood on the porch and watched as they entered my home. I didn't stay to watch him get handcuffed. I didn't need to. The fallout was absolute. The insurance company pressed felony fraud charges and the feds got involved. The asset freeze locked him out of everything. He couldn't touch a single dime to defend himself. During the divorce, Julian was entirely powerless. Vivian absolutely annihilated his legal team. I kept the house, my business, and every cent he tried to steal. He had to sign over his remaining equity just to cover the damages. Eleanor had to sell the family estate to pay for his defense lawyers. Now she's in a small rented condo, telling everyone I destroyed her family. But the truth is, I didn't destroy anything. I just handed them the match they already lit. Julian is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a federal facility. The sophisticated guy who thought the world owed him everything is now just another inmate. He lost it all because of his own greed. The ring was seized as evidence and eventually auctioned off to cover their debts. I could have bought it back. I definitely had the money. But some things carry way too much dark energy to ever bring back into the light. Looking back at the woman who was crying over a piece of metal and a man who despised her, I barely recognize her. I had to walk through absolute darkness to find my own power. But I came out the other side completely untouchable. If you feel that quiet unease in your own home, don't ignore it. Lesson 1. Never ignore sudden shifts in behavior. Warning: when someone gets fiercely protective of their phone or their money, they're building walls to hide what they're doing. Trust your gut. Lesson 2. When you discover a betrayal, don't confront them while you're angry. Silence is your greatest weapon. Gather your evidence, secure your money, and build your fortress. Let them think they're winning while you quietly orchestrate their downfall. Lesson 3. You are not responsible for carrying the shame of someone else's toxic behavior. When they get caught, they'll try to blame you. Refuse to carry their baggage. Just walk away with your dignity, your wealth, and your peace, totally intact. Welcome to Karma's Diary. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the truth always comes to light. And karma never misses a deadline.